Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event this evening with Catherine McKenzie and Barbara Claypole White to discuss 6 Weeks to Live, the new thriller by Catherine. My name is Talia. I'm the events manager here at Flyleaf. If you're new to the store, I encourage you to browse our full events calendar by clicking the Flyleaf Books logo above us. I am constantly adding new events for the spring and summer seasons, so please be sure to follow us on Crowdcast or subscribe to our email newsletter so you don't miss anything. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, please note that 6 Weeks to Live, along with other books from these authors, is available from Flyleaf. We have special book plates and bookmarks signed by Catherine that will be included with all copies ordered through the store. We are open for browsing, so you can come in to shop or click the link below our faces to buy your copies. Now I will go ahead and introduce our guest tonight. Catherine McKenzie is a best-selling author who has sold over 1 million books. She practiced law in Montreal for 20 years before retiring to write full-time. Her most recent novel, You Can't Catch Me, has been optioned for a television series by Paramount. She is an avid runner, skier, and amateur tennis player, and she lives and writes in Montreal. And our conversation partner tonight, local best-selling author Barbara Claypole White, was born in rural England, but she writes and gardens in the forests of Orange County, North Carolina. Her passion for creating troubled characters inspires emotionally charged book club fiction with complicated relationships, invisible disabilities, crazy critters, and lots of hope. Her novels include The Unfinished Garden, The In-Between Hour, The Perfect Sun, Echoes of Family, and The Promise Between Us. She is currently working on novel 6, The Gin Club. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. To keep the focus on our guests, I'm going to minimize my screen and let our guests talk to each other. If you think of a question you'd like to ask these authors, you can leave it in the chat or use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll pop back up at the end of the event to read those questions out loud to our guests. All right, I'm going to hop out and y'all have the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Talia. And we're assuming everyone can hear us. Please communicate through the chat if you can't. We are honored to have Catherine here with us tonight. I am especially excited because I'm a huge fan. I have been since the very beginning, and I know Catherine knows I'm going to do this,
okay.
But her debut spin is one of my all-time favorite books. If you've never read this book, please do yourself and buy it. Do yourself a treat, buy it. It's like Bridget Jones Does Rehab. It's a great book for now. It'll just make you laugh. So obviously we are here to talk about Catherine's May release, 6 Weeks to Live. I have to tell you guys that I read this, I don't know, about 6 months ago, Catherine, maybe longer.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And I do a lot of I read and listen to on audio through Libro.fm, brilliant service that supports your local indie bookstores. I do a lot of psychological thrillers. They're kind of my my book candy, my release, because that's nothing. I don't write psychological thrillers, right? But I am still thinking about the twist for this book. And the one question, obviously, I really want to ask Catherine, I can't, is about the twist. But let me just tell you, the twist is awesome. So, Catherine, could you please tell us a little bit about the book and
Sure.
The story behind it? I mean,
so it's about a woman who gets a tragic diagnosis and is given 6 weeks left to live. But it turns out that she may also have been poisoned a year earlier. And so she decides to spend her remaining time on Earth solving the mystery of her death. And
we learn that like in the first 2 lines. So
yeah, I'm not giving anything away.
We know that literally the first 2 lines are like, oh, you discover she's in the doctor's office, right? And she's given the diagnosis and told she has 6 weeks to live.
I mean, it is the title of the book also, I feel like.
It is the title of the book.
Not hidden.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I have to ask, because where did the story seed come from? Because that is just a killer book opening, 6 weeks to live.
I mean, you hear stories like that, and I think I was just thinking about having a clock on something like that. Like, I think, and when you write psychological thrillers, it's internally in books, there's what you call a ticking clock, often in a thriller. So there's a countdown to some event. And so I wanted something that was kind of an externalized countdown to an event. So that was the beginning seed.
Right.
Yeah.
And why this particular, why cancer, do you think?
I think that's just something that, I did some research on things where you are given those kind of precise diagnoses, and I think that came up as one of the options. I think with other diseases, it's not so precise, and it's not always that precise, but it can be. And so I wanted to be, I think with myself and research, I always try and do something that is realistic enough to happen, but it doesn't have to get into the minutiae and the nitty gritty, because it's not really the point of the story. I think it's the frame of the story.
Yeah.
I think the point of the story is more like, did somebody do this to her? Why did they do this to her? Why would she immediately assume that somebody had done this to her?
Yeah.
I think those are really the three core questions that are at issue in the book.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I found so interesting that I know, a lot of people have asked you about the triplets. She has triplets.
She has triplets. Yeah.
Two of them are identical. One of them, I can't remember the
one fraternal.
One fraternal, right?
Yeah.
And what is so intriguing to me is that there is so much about how differently the siblings remember their childhood. And as a history major, one of the first courses that I did, because in England we specialize really early on, right from the beginning. At university is our first course. We had the professor got all these newspapers, because it was early 80s and there were lots of newspapers, and took a current event and said, right, we're going to see how every source, covers this story. It was like
so interesting.
Plane crash. And they all did it completely differently. They didn't, none of, obviously the politics, the paper, but they didn't even agree on the number of fatalities or, the number of injured people, or, it was amazing. So that was a huge eye-opener to me about how we tell stories and how we collect memories and relate them. And then when you think back to families and siblings, I mean, you have siblings, right? You must have completely different tales to your siblings.
Yeah, I mean, I think it came from sort of two different strands. So one, I am one of three. I'm the oldest, and there's 7 years between me and my brother, which, as my nephew pointed out to me the other day, that means when you were 14, he was only 7. Because he and his brother are only 23 months apart. So
that is quite a good age gap.
Yeah, he was having trying to wrap his brain around that. And so it did always interest me how there were family stories where, I would tell a story and they would be like, that's not how that happened, or that happened to me, not to you, or things like that. And then, I practiced law for 20 years, and something I learned early in my career and I had to educate my clients about was that, you can put 10 people in the same meeting and you can ask them about that meeting an hour after it happened, and they will all have different memory of events. And it doesn't mean anybody's lying. It just, we all personally recall different things depending on what's important to us. Did we tune out during this part that we find boring? Is this somebody who's annoying? So we remember when they were talking. We just all have different heuristics that make us remember things differently.
And that's a huge part. I mean, to me, that was a huge building block of the story. Of the twist that I can't ask you about.
Well, I mean, look, it's a family. It's a family dynamic, and so part of the solution lies in the family for sure. And part of the reason they can't get to the solution is because they do all have these completely different memories of their childhood and certain events that happened to them. And then
on top of that, they're all dealing with the fact that, their mother is dying, and that the heroine is dealing with the fact that she's dying. So there are many, many layers to every character's emotional.
Right. Well, and I always thought, I mean, in my book, I'll Never Tell is also about a family trying to solve something that happened 20 years earlier to a girl. And I always remember when I was writing that book, I was like, if these people could just sit in a room for 1 hour and talk to each other, they could figure this out. There wouldn't be any mystery. But, we have these barriers in our families that prevent us from listening. Only family members can take you from 0 to absolute rage in 3 seconds, right? Because we know each other in ways, and the level of friction that we can create is so great. And then conversely, lots of good things can happen too. But, in a thriller, not that many good things are happening. So.
And I find it particularly interesting with, 3 siblings that are the same age.
Right.
because I think a lot of the different memories that my sister and I have are related to the fact that
Right.
she was the first, and she was the the one who pushed all the boundaries. I was the baby of the family and the good girl, but I didn't really have to rebel because she'd already done it all. I just followed on behind. So it's really interesting but there is still a pecking order, isn't there, in the siblings? A very definite pecking order.
Well, I mean, even though they're triplets, there is still an oldest, there is a middle child, there is a younger sibling, and they definitely fit into those roles. And then, what fascinated me, so I know someone who has triplets that have that configuration, but they're 8 years old, so they're like, the characters in my book are obviously not based on these girls that I have never even met, actually. And but when I learned about it, I just sort of been fascinated about that, particularly this idea of identical twins that for sure always get referred to as the twins because they look so much alike, but actually they're triplets. So there's, necessarily almost genetically somebody who's a little outside,
Yeah, I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I do find it fascinating. And I would love to, when these girls are adults, like talk to them about their childhood and what that was like, and what do you even do if you have that configuration? Do you try and separate them in different classes? If you live somewhere where the school is big enough, to give them their separate identities, do you dress them differently?
And they're all so different. They also have such different personalities.
Yeah.
So as you're reading the book, you're not really thinking of them as as the same age as triplets.
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's 4 narrators in the book. So Jennifer, the mother, and then the 3 triplets each narrate. And as you know, Barbara, when you're doing multiple narrators, you have to give those characters distinct voices, obviously. And so, so I really did just try and make them as different from each other as possible. But the twins, as I call them in the book, are kind of the reverse of each other in a way. Yeah.
And you don't, only the mother has first point of view, right? So you have different
the others are the others are in third person.
Which I found because I know that we have some writers in the audience, because North Carolina is the writerly state, right, according to the North Carolina Writers Network. And so I know that questions like that are intriguing to the writers in our audience.
I mean, I have at least one other book like that, or well, I guess I'll Never Tell is a little bit like that as well. But I did that for the first time in my book Smoke, where one character was first person, one character was third, and the when you do that in the book, you're the best, Barbara. When you do that in a book, you are necessarily setting up a barrier, I think, between the reader and the person in third, or the people in third, because it is a more distant point of view. And so you will always feel closer. So I could see with Smoke, for instance, that people tended not to like the character, or less like the character who was in third person than the character who was in first person, even though, frankly, if you sort of made a pro-con list of the two of them and their actions, the worst person was probably the person in first. And that was an interesting lesson to me as a writer about how I could, to use a word, manipulate the reader by what point of view I chose.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
So if you want to keep them a little bit like this, you can,
Yeah. Well, because thinking back to I'll Never Tell, the murderer was the last person I suspected.
Good. But there were 7 narrators. So six of them were in third person. And then the victim, who was kind of narrating the night in question, was in first. So really the people that you spend, and there's just little snippets from her. So the people that you spend most of the time with in the book are in third person. And then even then, to me, there's a main character of that book who was Meredith. Is that her name? No, that's not her name.
I haven't got it. That one's on Kindle.
Jeez. Anyway, whatever
Maybe
the main
someone
character.
In the audience.
But there is somebody who you spend more time with. Oh my God, it's so bad.
Yeah, there is.
Not Mary, Margaret, Maggie. No.
I would look at, my e-reader is downstairs.
Whatever, it's fine. It's fine. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I said Barbara and I use the same online assistant, and I've said more than once that I need to hire her to go through all of my books and make like a Catherine McKenzie Bible of names that I've used in novels, because I gravitate sometimes to the same names or to names all with the same letter and things like that.
And also, I mean, I might be wrong about this, but you are so productive. And I don't know, just to reiterate for those of you in the audience who didn't kind of catch this from the bio, Catherine wrote most of these books while she was a full-time lawyer, which is pretty amazing considering, I'm like struggling to get my 6th book out, and I don't have a day job beyond my family. So I have the impression that you write fast and clean. Is that kind of accurate?
I think that's right. And I think I've learned over time how to write faster and cleaner than I did with my first couple of books. Because for sure, my first couple of books, which I wrote before I wrote Spin, but I also wrote Arranged and Forgotten all before I had a book deal. And so,
that's right.
It's fine. The visual portion, the show and tell portion. But so I kind of had infinite time to write those books. Not that I took infinite time, but then for sure, my first editorial process with Spin took way longer, just even to absorb the comments of my editor. Like it took, I remember 3 passes of her kind of saying the same thing to me 3 times before I was like, oh, I know what I need to do. But so I think I've gotten better at that, and giving myself tricks. So, I mean, the nice thing about having this, 6 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks was that then I can take the word count I need to get to and I can divide it by 6. And then it's like, okay, this month I need to write this many words. And so it's like a nice, and the way I approached this book was that each section is a little novella, really. So it's a week in their life from a starting point to an end point with a twist at the end. And so that helped me write that, faster, I think, to do that. But
so how long do you think it took you to write this before you turned it in?
That particular one was actually quite fast because I was 2/3 of the way through writing another book that got dumped. So I had
happens to the best of us.
It happens to the best of us. So or the worst of us, or whatever, the mediocre of us. So so I was kind of under a crunch, and I had to kick myself in the butt. I was lucky a time period where I wasn't that busy at work. I also had a lot of, at the same time, work travel, and I write very well. Like on airplanes, I can do massive bursts. Just when I'm traveling, I can do, because, a lot of the other distractions fall away. And then I turned this in the first week of March. So right before the pandemic, which I was so grateful to have done that, because all writing stopped for, I had to edit the book, but I just, I'm sure, and I know, in fact, many, many authors, the same thing. It took me months to be able to write again. Like I was just like, no. So. And
you had quit. You quit.
I quit. No, in August of last year. So after I had turned this book in, and then I spent the last summer wrapping up my law practice, and then our cases were very low last summer, and most of our restrictions were lifted. And so I rented a cottage with a friend and went there for a week and did nothing, didn't write, just chilled out, which I never do. And then I sort of started next year's book, which is finished, in September.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how many, you have 11 books
11 out,
novella?
A novella, and then another book that I wrote with a bunch of other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And how many options for movies?
There's 3.
That's pretty
three books that are option. Yeah. I mean, whether any of those things will actually happen, you just never know, So it's great to have, and it's very flattering, and you get on phone calls with people from Hollywood who tell you how amazing you are. So that's like, who doesn't want to hear that all day long?
So one of the questions I want to ask you, I know it's a little unrelated to 6 weeks to live, and I will come back to this, but How did you know, as someone who's read most of your books, you know, it feels to me like your shift from trying to find, you know,
Spin.
from basically spin, right,
Yeah,
which is romantic comedy,
yeah,
to, you know, into women's fiction, especially women's fiction with a darker edge. This is actually my beta reader's favorite of your book. She's read all your books, so she loves this book.
I mean, I think it started with Hidden, to be honest. So
yeah, because that does have an edge, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I wrote Arranged, and which is about a woman who uses an arranged marriage service. It was sort of the first, you know, commercial, not about me idea that I had for a book, and I had fun writing it, and then I wrote the book that became The Murder Game, which is actually a murder mystery.
Oh yeah, and that's
set
really
at law
good.
school, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Thanks. And then I wrote Spin. All of this was before I had a book deal, and then once I got the deal for Spin, you know, you sort of get slotted into a slot. And I thought I was writing romantic comedies also. I thought I was the female Nick Hornby. And, in fact, my favorite was Tish Cohen gave me my favorite blurb, you know, of all time, which was like, if Bridget Jones and Nick Hornby had a love child, this would be it.
I remember reading that.
Yeah, and so I was like, yes, you get me, thank you.
Oh yeah, it's all, yes.
Yep, there you go. It's on the cover probably. And then I wrote Forgotten, and I even though they are quite different, and I don't feel that way about them now, when I finished, at the time, everything written by a woman was being called chicklet, which is a very sort of derogatory term.
I hate that
you
term.
get the paint covers, and there's nothing wrong with chicklet, but I think what was happening was that I was trying to write romantic comedies, Nick Hornby, you know, romantic comedies with an edge, and people would read them and they'd be like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. It's not chick, you know,
because this is set in rehab.
I know, right? Because,
think about that.
None of my characters cared about shoes or fashion, and the main point wasn't necessarily romance, even though Range is about that. And so, and I guess I was just sort of mad, and I also wanted to challenge myself. I didn't want to feel like I was writing the same book and over again. So I decided with Hidden that I was going to challenge myself, and I was going to kill the romantic lead in the prologue.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant.
So he's dead from the beginning, and so there can't be a happy ever after with that book. And it took me a long time. You know, I really, really kicked myself in the pants to up my game. And that book it took me the longest to write that book. It took me 18 months to write that book. It's the only book I've ever asked for an extension on. Yeah, it was a tough book to write, but it did move me into a different category. And I think and then going back, The Good Liar, right? Yeah.
Oh no, there was
so it was Smoke. It was Hidden, then Smoke, then Fractured, which I have on my Kindle, and then The Good Liar,
which has this great blurb from Megan Miranda: thought-provoking, suspenseful, and mysterious.
Yeah,
and then of course.
And part of me, honestly, like I do, and you know, like I do want to also write romantic comedies. You know, I want to be able to do both. You know, and maybe I will. But I think also the book world changed too, and I think, you know, my romantic comedies always had twists in them.
Yeah,
like there is a twist in Spin. There is a twist in Arranged. You know, so I always did have a twist, and I think that's just how my brain works. So it was deliberate and yet not deliberate, if that makes sense. It's just I've always just wanted to tell the stories I wanted to tell, and so far I've been lucky enough to. One dumped book aside, I've been lucky enough to be able to do that, and you know, my publishers.
And it does, as a fan and a reader, it does feel very organic. And the interesting thing is, you know, You Can't Catch Me, which has this great quote from Mary Kubica, one of my favorite. It was addictive and fast-paced. You can't catch me proves that sometimes revenge is sweet. And it was interesting because the pace of this one really
Yeah.
actually, in a way, reminded me of the pace of Spin. I mean, I could tell they were
Right.
written by the same author, although
Right.
this one has another really killer good twist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's interesting that you pick up on that, because actually You Can't Catch Me was the first person book that I had written since Forgotten.
Oh, really?
One narrator, because with Hidden, there's 3 narrators, Smoke is 2.
Right.
And I had moved into having multiple narrators. And with You Can't Catch Me, I deliberately was like, I need to try writing one first person narrator again and see if I can do that. Because, it's, excuse me, your characterization is different when you do that. You have to have somebody that people are okay with being with that much of the time. One person, their backstory has to be more complex and evolved. And so that was a deliberate thing. And then, Spin has a lot of energy. I think that's what's always.
Yeah, that's great energy.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually read it in one sitting, and I'm a slow reader, and I'm someone who feels guilty if I'm not just reading at night, because I feel like I should be doing something else. So I read at night in bed, so I never read during the day, but I literally read this one whole day. There was some stuff going on in the family. I thought, I'm just going to check out. And it was the perfect escape for me.
I mean, you wrote me
nothing else
email after you finished that.
Yeah, I love that book so much. It's just, I remember it very fondly. But there's one other thing I wanted to ask you, just for the writers and the audience, and then we're going to get back to the book of the hour. You had, when you were chatting recently in one of your events for 6 Weeks to Live, you talked about sticky ideas.
Right.
And I love that. Can you just explain what sticky ideas are, rather?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they're first starting to write, are struggling with finishing the book, or I start something and then I get bored of it and I leave it alone. And so, I was trying to explain, like, how do I know when a story is the one that I should be writing? And that is to me, the word that came to me is that it's sticky. It sticks in my brain. The characters live with me. I'm still interested in them. I want to know what happens to them. And I get lots of ideas, and then 2 days later I'm like, whatever. No, that doesn't go anywhere. So I'm looking for that idea that is going to stick with me, because best case scenario, I'm going to spend 2 years working on a book, even if it takes me a year to write it or less, between all the revisions and then when it comes out and all that stuff. And so that's the minimum. And you could end up spending way longer, right, working on a book. And so there has to be something about that story that won't let you go, I think. And I think it's also a good indication that if you're fascinated with it, then hopefully readers will be too, right? Because it's something that is so alive to you and your brain. And so, my trademark name for that is sticky.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
So the ideas that you sort of put aside, do you ever revisit them in a different
sometimes
formation? And
so The Good Liar, the Good Liar was like that. The Good Liar has 3 narrators, and I had the idea for one of the storylines years before I wrote that book. So that's about 3 women affected by the same tragedy and connected through the same tragedy. So I had the storyline for one of them years before I wrote the book, maybe 3, 4, 5 years before I wrote the book. And then I had the second storyline, and I was like, this doesn't go anywhere either. And then somebody told me a story, or sorry, that's not even it. I heard something that connected the 2 pieces together, and the third storyline was born. And I was like, I can finally use this idea that I discarded. So I keep my idea files around, and sometimes pieces of those can get used in other things, but I think I also, coming a bit back on my previous answer, I think another mistake is that people get fixated on character and there's no story. It's another way that people get stuck. I wasn't calling you out.
I know. I do that because plot is really hard for me. And
right.
That's interesting.
And I think it's important to know, at least, and I am a pantster. I don't know everything that's going to happen in my books before I write them, but I do have the big arc before I start writing. If I can't get the big arc, then, and I actually started writing the book that I turned in for next year. I actually started writing it without a clear idea of where it was going to end up. And I realized 2/3 of the way through, like I had my 2/3 of the way twist. And then I was like, I don't have another twist. And I think the rest of this book is just explaining what happened. And I was like, oh no, I need another twist. And so thankfully I found it in the manuscript, which I do think solutions usually present themselves already in your manuscript if you think about it enough.
Okay, yeah.
So thankfully I found a couple more twists that were already in my manuscript, but it really reaffirmed to me that I just can't do that. Like I have to make big decisions before I start writing. And I think I always get story first and then character afterwards. And I would say in a completely unscientific way, from the many, many writers I've talked to, that more often than not, when people get stuck, it's because they have character first and not story. And I get it, because there's these super compelling people. Like, I love this story about Catherine Hepburn, who was in this 30-year affair with, what's his name? The actor that she was in all those movies with, right? Look Who's Coming to Dinner, and right, they were together for.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I've been researching that since we got off.
It's fascinating. I mean, they had a 30-year affair. He was married the whole time, and
I didn't know that.
She didn't go to his funeral, but she waited outside the funeral home and followed his hearse.
Oh, wow.
And she actually called his wife after he died, and they had a conversation, something like, you know, I always thought we should meet or something. And his wife said, to me, you were always a rumor. And it's just like, right? And I get chills every time I think about that. But where does that go?
Did you know that story before you wrote Hidden?
I don't think so. I'm not sure I did, actually. Because I remember I was in North Carolina with some people that Therese Fowler and Therese Walsh. And I was trying to convince Therese Fowler to write, because she writes historical fiction, or she did at the time. And I was like, you need to write the story. And she's like, you should write it. And I'm like, I don't know how to write that story, but you know how to write that story. But that's brilliant. It's a good example of where I'm just sort of like, Spencer Tracy and Catherine Hepburn.
That's it, Spencer Tracy.
It wasn't. Yeah, you're right, Linda. It wasn't open secret, except for his wife just was doing this the whole time. And so
it's fascinating.
Fascinating, right? But it's not a book. It's a scene in a movie. It's for me anyway. It's not a book. So.
But this all came from that opening idea that you could have 6 weeks.
Well, and it also, I love the movie DOA. The 80s version of DOA. Growing up, I watched that movie a bunch of times. So for those of you who haven't seen that movie, and it's based on a famous noir film from the late 50s, the man shows up at a police station and says, I'd like to report a murder. And the police are like, okay, who's dead? And he's like, me. But he's not dead yet. And so, right.
So, I mean, was there a personal angle at all to the the clock ticking, someone having a terminal diagnosis?
Yeah, for sure. But the book is dedicated. So
that's fantastic. Well, I mean, that's not fantastic. But so if you had that's not fantastic. Sorry. I've only had a little bit of wine, I promise. So if you and it does provoke that great question, what would you do? What would you do if you were given that diagnosis? And you had 6 weeks. You were told.
I say facetiously, go to the beach with a pitcher of margaritas.
Yeah, but I'll be here in the North Carolina forest with my gin, or my local gin.
Will you still be gardening? Will you still be pulling weeds?
I would be gardening, and I would like to think that I would be reading. And my great friend and I have this thing. We hope on. The thing that we're going to think on our deathbeds is going to be, oh, I'm not going to read another great book, because there's always another great book out there. And the hardest thing for me is choosing. When I rarely get to choose what I read. normally I was reading something for someone I've got 2 books this week that I have to read, and I want to read both of them. But it's like when I go to my stacks, my incredible stacks, I'm just overwhelmed by choice, and I want to read all of them. And often I will spend an hour before bed picking up all these books and reading the first line and putting down, think, well, I want to read that, but I want to read that. And at some point, I just have to just pick one, because then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I have to go to bed, because I'm a 6 a.m. writer, so I have to pick a book so I could read and have my reading time. But the choice is just so hard.
No, I get that, and for a long time, I actually used to reread a lot of books, because I'd rather reread something that I knew I loved than sort of get disappointed.
What's a book that you've reread?
Oh, many of them, but I mean, I reread all of Jane Austen every couple of years.
My mother did that.
Yeah. I've, more recently I've read Gone Girl probably 3 times. And I mean, I read that once as a reader, and then I went back and sort of read it, as a writer mechanically. How did she do that? I've reread The Night Circus a bunch of times. I love that book. The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, even though it's a tough read, it's such a beautiful book.
I love that book.
Yeah, I definitely reread less, I will say. Like you, I'm often
I'm sure a lot more than me, actually.
Well, it goes in waves. To be honest, it goes in waves. I would say probably the only books I read during the pandemic for 9 months were books that I had to read, and then I finally, in I think January, I was like, this is ridiculous. I need to teach myself how to read again, after the insurrection and all this stuff, when that was finally over and things seemed calmer, and it felt like I didn't have to read the news every single night. And I started assigning myself. So I do read on Kindle, and I would, when you read, so I was like, I just have to read 10% of a book. And I'll read 10% tomorrow. And I'm really glad I did that, because it broke my reading.
See, I got really into audiobooks.
Oh yeah, I can't do audio. My brain cannot concentrate on audio, because I use podcasts to fall asleep. So if I start playing an audiobook, I'm just my mind wanders and I feel sleepy.
Yeah. No, I can't listen to audiobooks at night, because I have fallen asleep in the middle and woken up, and it's really hard to go back and figure out. But I listen to them when I garden, when I'm out running errands. And that's cool. I discovered John Sanford during lockdown, so I went through the entire. I've got 2 books left in the Virgil Flowers series, and quite a few left in Prey. But they're just, it's kind of like book candy, and I'm listening to Virgil Flowers right now on my phone, and just.
It is nice when you find that author and you're like, I want to read everything they ever wrote. And then you're like, oh, look, the top 15 books. Amazing. Yeah.
Well, and that's what people must think for you, because you've got a great backlist for people to.
The backlist is there. So yeah.
And I just have to say, because I forgot to say this earlier, and I hope that she figured out how to log in. But if Carol Boyer is here from Connecticut, I just want to give a shout out to Carol, who was my first ever fan, and I love
She's a great fan.
she follows all the authors that I love, and I love that she bought the book from Flyleaf a while ago, and my son, who works at Flyleaf, sent it to her, and she was so excited. She said, I got Catherine's book from Flyleaf, and your son sent it to me. And I just,
the internet comes together in one.
I mean, I love the way all that works. And I had this little picture of you being up in Canada, Flyleaf down here in Chapel Hill, and then Carol's over here in Connecticut, and it just all kind of works.
Full circle.
It's kind of amazing. So I don't know how we're doing for time.
We're at 3:41.
Okay, so I don't know. I just shoot in another quick few questions before Talia interrupts. So is there one message that you hope that readers take away from this book, or?
I mean, I think, one of the things that I was exploring in that book is the sort of expectations that get put on people, and in particular women, I think, in divorce.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd talk about that.
Yeah, and I think, I I'm in my 40s, and like my 20s and 30s where all my friends got married, and unfortunately not all of them have made it. And it's been nothing has gone in my group of friends like I predicted it would when that happened.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
for good and for bad, unfortunately. And I think it's really struck me how people have this expectation now. Like when I was growing up, if people's parents got divorced, like nobody thought, like parents had Christmas together if they were divorced or went on vacation, and then now there's all this pressure that, like, oh, for the sake of the children, you still have to talk to this person, who was horrible to you. I don't know why we put that pressure on other people. Like, it's their life and they're just trying to do the best they can with often a terrible situation. And you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And if they don't want to talk or be friends with the person who had promised to be with them for the rest of their life, and it's now
Even if you've
them,
only got 6 weeks to live.
yeah, or whatever, exactly. And I do think that's another thing. It's a theme I actually explored in a different way in my book, Forgotten. But I think the other pressure that people have is like, you have to resolve everything, like if you were dying, you should resolve all the conflicts in your life. And I'm like, life doesn't work like that. Like, life doesn't work like that. If you couldn't work it out in this whole time, and maybe that's not what you want to do. Like, and that's okay too. I think we do have all these expectations about how other people should act in given situations, and it's way more complicated. Yeah,
especially. And I think for women in terms of parenting, I mean, 100%. I remember traveling with a young child who had OCD, and travel was a trigger, and strangers offering parental advice, and I was going, I know what I'm doing, could you please just leave me alone? This is not helping. You're distracting me from doing the work that I know how to do to get my child through this, because we have a really good psychologist. And so it's very, and you don't want to be rude because they're trying to help. But then I have, at that same point, I had friends who had autistic children, and when they were on the road, people would always interfere and sort of
Yeah, well, that always found me always fascinating me. I don't have kids, so I never went through this, but I certainly observed with my friends that, like, pregnant women seem to belong to the world. Like, it's okay suddenly for people to touch you because you're pregnant. I'm like, what is this? Like, well, you go up to men's beer bellies and just start like touching, no.
Well, I feel that this is very much a women's book. It's very much a women's story, and it is very much a book about the choices we make.
Yeah.
Including,
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just gonna say yes, but I don't want to I'm not seeking men's approval for my novels, but I don't like how in the book world things get slotted into these are for women, and men shouldn't read it or can't enjoy it. I'm actually deliberately trying to make often many of my characters the way men are portrayed in books and not the way women are portrayed in books, because I like subverting that. And in You Can Catch Me, for example, like the boyfriend is the supportive role that a woman usually plays in a book or in a movie, and that was deliberate. So I'm not trying to like beat my opinions over anyone's head, but these themes are there, and I just want to write real people, not these sort of idealized versions that we sometimes get forced into. Talia's back.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry. I don't want to interrupt the conversation, but I do want to give the audience, anybody who's watching, who has any questions, a chance to jump in, and I will be happy to read your questions out loud to Catherine and Barbara. Right now, it looks like the majority of the questions are sort of logistical, like, are your books on audio, which they are.
Yes,
will this event be recorded? It is being recorded right now, and it will be available to watch back. It's just the same link that if you're watching and want to share with a friend, you just send the same exact link to them, and as soon as we wrap up, it'll be available as a video. If anyone else has any questions and they want to use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen or say it in the chat, I would be happy to read it out loud. So I'll just hang out here if we get any more questions, but feel free to continue your conversation, Barbara, if you have anything else you'd like to ask.
Oh, hey, no, I just clicked on the chat and I was saying hi to Lynn.
Oh.
Sorry, someone in the chat. Yes, when can we expect the next book out?
I don't have a
what is
date.
the title? What is the title?
Okay, the next book is called Please Join Us. And it's about a woman who joins a women's networking organization that turns sinister and potentially cult-like.
Oh, nice.
I don't have a release date yet, but potentially June of next year. So we shall see.
Oh. And I assume you are already then working on the next one.
I have some pages for the next one. It's early stages. I actually did have to, it's my option book as we call it. So I did have to write an outline, which I hate doing, and we'll probably never consult again, but if my editor's on here, I'm kidding, of course.
And so, and I assume that they're all still psychological suspense.
Yeah.
You're not shifting that just yet.
No, but I have some side projects.
You dropped something into a chat the other day about I met on Twitter.
Yeah,
rom-com.
That's right. Yeah. So I have written a rom-com with another writer that we connected on Twitter, actually, and which it sounds like the beginning of the rom-com, though it's not romantic between us, obviously, but and that's out on submission, and we'll see if somebody buys it. But that's a film, not a book. And then we've also written a pilot for a TV show that is hopefully going out soon. So we'll see.
So I asked you this a long time ago. I think I maybe asked you this the first time I ever met you. Do you sleep?
And the answer that I always give is no. But no. The real answer is no, but not because I'm writing. I just have insomnia, but it's useless. It's good for watching TV and reading books, and not for writing. But I do sleep. Yes, I really have. I used to have a whole law job, Carol. Not Carol, Barbara. Sorry, and now I have I'm bored.
I know. Have you found that your writing process has changed quite a bit since you've given up law practice?
Yeah. Well, I used to write mostly on weekends in larger chunks. And then now I write Monday to Friday, 2 to 3 hours in the morning on my novel. And I need the weekends to do the brain work that I used to do, in the background, right? Like your subconscious mind is working when you're not writing, I find. And so I need those breaks now that I used to have without thinking about it. And that's good. I don't need to be writing 7 days a week anymore or working 7 days a week. That was part of the whole reason to step back from my law career. So I actually force myself to take the weekend off. And then even breaks, I'll usually write my novels in thirds. So I'll take a break between thirds as well to sort of let things germinate.
That's interesting. Why thirds? Is that just the way that you're...
I guess to me, the first third is the setup. And that's, I often spend the most time on that because I'm working out the characters and the setting and the rest of the plot and all that stuff. And then the middle third is the hard part, because that's where you can get into the soggy middle and you have to have all your B plots and things like that. And then the B plot. The B plot. And then the last third is always the easiest for me to write because I'm wrapping things up. And so I think it's just always been, I don't know if no, I know for a fact I haven't always done that, but as I've learned to become more efficient and just what works for me in terms of writing, I found that for the last 4 or 5 books at least, I'll write a third, go back to the beginning, get comments from my beta readers, then write the next third, go back to the beginning, get comments, and then write the last third. So that's kind of, I'm actually trying, this time I'm trying just to write the whole thing through. And I think you were a beta reader on one of my books at least.
Yeah, I remember reading the first third of The Good Lie. I was in England. Yeah. And it was that was it. was like, okay, so you can't leave me there.
Where's the rest of it? I know, right? Yeah.
I need to know what happens next.
I don't know about you, but I need feedback while I'm writing. I've never written an entire novel without getting any feedback from somebody. Like that's not how I work. So luckily my sister reads everything as I write it. So
I'm going to jump in. We have a question here from Linda, who says, I really liked your discussion of character, story, and narrative. I want to bring up language. Fast and clean is hard to do. Would you like to play with or experiment more with language? And I guess how so?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel when you've written like as many books as I have, it starts to feel like I'm plagiarizing myself sometimes when I, certain analogies or similes or metaphors or so. And then I was rereading through something and I'm like, how many times has this character looked in this manuscript? Like they literally did a search for the word look or looked. And I'm just like, this is lazy, but it's so easy to say like, I looked over so I'm trying to, in this beginning of a book that I'm working on, just challenge myself a little bit with language and maybe try and have a few more sentences that I go, oh, that's a good sentence, but without getting too literary about it, because I'm not writing literary fiction. And so, I do think one of the things I'm trying to do is to have things read smoothly, and I don't want people being thrown out of the story. And I think often if your analogy is too complicated or you use an unusual word, you can throw somebody. It's very easy to throw people out of stories, and I'm actively trying not to do that. I also think, and my law mentor was big about this, is that you can convey complex ideas with simple language, and it can often be more effective. And particularly in the law, but also writers can get into their unbeknownst and heretofores and wherewithals and whatever. So I do try and keep it simple.
I remember, one of the things that struck me about when I was reading 6 Weeks to Live is that you have a lot of short, snappy dialogue that really works. And, even without the dialogue tags, which is always the kind of the thing for me, you still know who's speaking.
Yeah,
have to said this was so-and-so said, or so-and-so looked over at so-and-so,
Right,
you don't have to have a beat. And I kind of loved that because it was,
yeah, that's deliberate too. And I would say, like, if somebody asks me, what do I think that I do well, is that, like, I do come out in a first draft as dialogue, and I am trying to use as few dialogue tags as possible to be able and still keep the thread. And like my editor will every once in a while be like, I've lost the thread of who's speaking. I'm like, okay, time for a dialogue tag, or time for me to do the work and make it clear through the dialogue who's speaking. So I mean, I have to say, when I read books that heavily rely on dialogue tags, it drives me nuts. Like, too many he said, she says, it drives me bonkers. And
that doesn't work in audiobooks.
No, well, they cut them out, I think, in audio, don't they?
It's really annoying in an audiobook.
Do they actually say them in the audio? They don't cut them out? Oh.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, that's
terrible. If it's unabridged, there can be a lot of said.
Right.
Stop.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like as a reader, if you're reading a physical book, at least for me, if you get used to it, it's you sort of just your mind edits it out anyway. Right.
I never edit it out. I'm just annoyed.
You don't edit aloud?
No. I'm saying I don't. If I'm reading a book that has too many dialogue tags, I mean, I might not even finish that book because it's actually a personal pet peeve of mine.
Cut it off. Yeah.
Well, and I don't know about you, Barbara, but I found, since I write books, particularly when I'm in an editing phase, I sometimes start editing the book I'm reading.
I do too.
And it's stupid. It's stupid things like, oh, they use this word 5 times in the same page. It's the stuff I'm looking for in my books. And that I remember the first time it happened to me, and I was like, oh my God, have I ruined reading for myself forever? And thankfully I can normally shut it off. It's really just when I'm in that like deep editing, line edit, copy edit phase.
So can I ask one last quick question, Tom?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, of course. So when did you know you were going to be a writer? How did that come to you?
I don't think I ever made a decision. I wrote poetry growing up. My dad always wanted to write detective fiction, and it was like his retirement project. So it was a thing that I was like discussed in my house as something that you could do. And he actually went about it very methodically. He didn't know how to type, so he taught himself how to type, and then he took writing classes. But I never thought about it for me. I was just always a big reader. And then 15, 16, 17 years ago, whatever it was, I had an idea that wouldn't leave me alone. And I literally didn't know what it was. And I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, should I make a movie? Like, what is this? And I eventually just started writing it down. And that eventually turned into my first novel that lives in a drawer. And once I had done that, I had the idea for a range. And I was like, okay, let me try and see if I can write something that is not about me at all. You know, my most first books are semi-autobiographical often.
Yeah.
Mine was certainly. And
Mine in the drawer.
Yeah. And so, but I felt like I was glad to write that and put it away because I felt like I got myself out of the way. And so I wrote Arranged and I was happy with it. And so then I decided to try and find an agent. And I didn't really, I literally, I mean, I would joke for years that I turned my fun hobby into a second job I didn't need, you know, like, and it's not to complain, but I know people who are like from childhood, I want to be a writer when I grow up. I am going to be a writer. I just wasn't that person. And so I did kind of fall backwards into a writing career, which is, I actually deliberately turned away from the arts. I wanted to be an actress and I deliberately didn't do.
That's interesting.
I didn't do that because I didn't want to be in a career where I could be the best at it, but I could still never succeed because I didn't look right or it was too heavy or whatever, right? And I wanted to have more control over my life in terms of effort and reward. And so I deliberately turned away from that. And then I somehow ended up in the arts anyway.
Yeah, it's going to come out somehow.
It's going to come out sometime. Yes.
No.
Yes. Whatever.
I'd love to ask you both a question that I have been asking at a lot of my author events recently. What's something, you already sort of talked about what you're working on, but if there's anything else you'd like to plug, and then Barbara, we'd love to hear about what you're working on a little bit. And then what is the book that you've read and loved recently?
I've read two books recently that I love that are similar in some ways, and so The Magician, the Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and the Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And I really liked both of them. I think I liked Invisible Life a bit better than the Midnight Library, but I think maybe only because I read it first. Like if I had read them in reverse order, and I'll throw in one more, and they're all, it's strange because I don't write this style of books. And they're all a little bit of magical realism, but I also really love The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I read last year. It was one of the only books that I just got lost in last year. So those are and I'm really looking forward to reading the Gin Club when you want to share it, Barbara.
Yeah, well.
I'm happy to beta. I'm happy to beta you.
Thank you. The novel that will never be finished.
Oh, come on.
I've actually, so this is how I read. These are as a writer. I mean, I just mark things. I bought this ages ago at Heathrow. Coming Back. My nephew recommended it. It is one of the funniest books I have ever read. It's The Life of a Junior Doctor. It's hysterical. And then I've just, two fabulous local authors. This is a local author, local press debut. I just finished it. This is funny and the settings are beautiful and the heroine is incredible and it really packs a punch. It won the Lee Smith Novel Prize. I think it's just one of my really all-time favorite books. I loved it. And right before, another local author. This is a book I've had in my stacks for a long time, and that I actually bought at Flyleaf eons ago when you had the event with Elaine Neil Orr, who's a local author, Swimming Between Worlds, which is just incredibly relevant right now, because it's about race, and you know, Elaine, she teaches at NC State, but she grew up as a missionary's daughter in Nigeria.
Oh wow.
So she's writing very authentically about race as a white woman. It's the right to, when Linda asked about language, this book and this book really make you think about language. So yeah, and the gin club is, I'm still working on it. And it will be set in Orange. It is set in Orange County.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fun. Thank you both so much for sharing. I always love to hear what everybody's enjoying reading lately.
Oh, and I'm still going to plug one more book coming, or two books coming out tomorrow. Yeah, Mary Kubica's new book, Local Woman Missing. I'm putting that in the chat.
Really
and then also my friend Alyssa Friedland, her book is also coming out tomorrow. Last Summer at the Golden Hotel. If you're looking for something fun and family, multi-generational drama, it's set in the Catskills. Think like Dirty Dancing meets.
Oh, brilliant! I should write that one down.
Drama. That also comes out tomorrow and is a Book of the Month club selection. And I'm sure you can order through Flyleaf also, but just two writer friends who have books coming out tomorrow. So
awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I feel like I'm overwhelmed every single pub day this season. There's so much.
Tuesdays are terrible. They're fabulous. But there've been so many good books out this month, you know, the new Chris Bojalian and Catherine. And
my day, all the books came out on my day. I was like, oh my God,
they did.
Oh, it was a big day.
It was a big day.
It was a big day. Not necessarily for me, but for others.
So there's definitely there are so many books to pick up. If you're looking for something to read, stop by the store and we would be happy to give you a recommendation if you need one. All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So just a few quick reminders. Buy local, buy from Flyleaf if you can. If you're around, we are open for in-person shopping. You can click the link below our faces to buy books by Catherine and Barbara. You can click the Flyleaf Books logo above our faces to look through all of our upcoming virtual events and all of our past virtual events as well. Those are all recorded, and this one will be there as well. As soon as we wrap up, you can watch the video, send it to a friend, and just a big thank you to our authors tonight. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Catherine. It's been
thank you so much for having
hearing your conversation tonight.
And thank you, Barbara, for agreeing to host this lovely event.
Thank you, Talia, for making it happen.
Yeah.
No
problem. And
next
year in person, right? Next year,
in person.
Stay at Barbara's house.
Yep.
Absolutely. We'll make it happen.
All right, cool.
I'll be the designated driver.
Why would you think I need a designated driver, Barbara?
No. Just throwing it out there.
All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a good night,
everyone. Happy reading.